Hello, class. Your first assignment for this course will be to write a short literacy narrative. What exactly is a literacy narrative? In this video, we'll go over what one is. We'll break it down to its component words. I'll give you an example of one and tell you the tools that you're expected to have in a literacy narrative. So let's get started. A literacy narrative is basically a short story about a real event that happened to you, and it relates in some way to reading or writing. Now, we tell stories about ourselves all the time. If you're a blogger, you share stories about yourself on social media or another location. So this is not really anything terribly new, but it is done in a slightly different way than you might be expecting. I always think it's helpful to break a new term down into its component words. So we have two terms here, literacy and narrative. In the next two slides, we'll go over what those words mean. A narrative is a story or a tale. It's basically a structure that allows us to interpret something. As I said before, we tell stories on ourselves all the time. So this is not anything new, but I want us to look at narrative in a slightly different way. If you've been following the news at all, you've probably heard the word narrative being used a lot these days. People in politics talk about controlling the narrative. Well, that's important because narrative isn't just a story we tell about ourselves. It's a story that other people tell to us, and it guides how we perceive things, whether we accept something as true or not. And this goes even more true for our own personal lives. The stories we tell about ourselves in our heads or to others guide how we see ourselves and how we present ourselves to others. So I promised you an example. Many years ago, when I was about 9 years old, I accompanied my mother, grandmother, and brother to a grocery store where on a comic book rack I encountered this fellow. That night I had a dream about that comic book, and I begged my mother the next day to take me back and buy that comic book. To her everlasting regret, she did. And why is that important? Well, stay tuned and you'll find out. That one comic book led to a lifelong love of comic books, which in turn led to a lifelong love of reading. And well, here I am all these many years later teaching college writing courses. Who would have thought that one single comic book would have had such a profound effect on my life? Okay, so that was a very, very short example of a literacy narrative, but I want to give you kind of an idea of what is required in a literacy narrative. Here are the tools we're looking for: a beginning, middle, and end, details, description, dialogue. Your textbook goes into much greater detail about these things than I can do in this short slide presentation. But look for these things in your story. And above all, your literacy narrative must have a point. There must be a reason for the story. And this can be the most important thing because sometimes we don't know how an event affected us until we start to write about it. How did this story, this thing that you're sharing, how did it affect your life? How did it affect your literacy? Did you learn to love writing? Did you learn to hate it? Did you learn to love reading or hate it? Either way is okay. So the whole point of this is to connect with others, step out of your comfort zone, be willing to share some things about you. And it's okay to be vulnerable. This isn't rocket science. That's a terrible expression, but it's just a way for you to kind of share who you are with me and maybe with your classmates and get to kind of understand how you connect with others. And the reason why we do this is to connect with others, to form relationships with readers, fellow students, your professors. All writing is about communicating something to someone. I hope you've enjoyed this short video, and if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me at any time. Have a good week.